Winter in the medieval world does not arrive as a gentle turning of the seasons, but as a heavy shadow pressing down upon thatched roofs, slipping through every grain of earthen walls, sinking into the slow breaths of people trying to hold on to their last threads of warmth. In homes without heated rooms, without glass windows, without sealed hearths, the cold does not strike violently. It seeps in, persistent, silent, as if an invisible hand that everyone can feel. The fire at the center of the house is only bright enough to see the mist rising from one's mouth, only warm enough to pull them through one more night. And with just a single missed moment of tending the flames, the entire dwelling can plunge into bitterness. The craftsmen, the farmers, the families gathered in that darkness are not searching for comfort. They are searching for a way to survive in a space that allows no mistakes. Imagine yourself standing in that dim room, the cold earth beneath your feet, the low smoke above your head, the wind circling through the thatch. How long could you endure a night with nothing more than what they had? What astonishes us is not that they endured, but that they transformed the home itself into a heat-keeping engine, both primitive and remarkably intricate. And if you wish to understand why those humble houses could withstand the long winter, stay until the end of the tale. For at times, the past holds secrets the present has forgotten. In a world where winter decides fate, choosing where to build a home is not a matter of convenience, but the first step in the art of survival. Medieval people could read every sign in the earth, every direction of the wind, every movement of the sun. They avoided valleys that seemed peaceful, yet were cold traps, where freezing air gathered like an invisible river. They also kept their distance from deep forests, where heavy shadows and dampness drained one's strength. Instead, they sought south-facing slopes where even the faintest winter sunlight could pour its rare warmth, and they set the back of the house against a low hillside, turning it into a natural shield against the northern winds. Each location was chosen not for beauty, but for its logic, as if handed down by the land and sky themselves. A single wrong choice could turn the entire winter into an unbeatable foe. But when the choice was right, the house seemed to merge with the pulse of the landscape. Warmer, steadier, more resilient against hardship. And from that quiet foundation, the home began its journey toward becoming the only fortress that could guard them from the lingering cold of the world outside. A medieval house does not begin with the straight timbers we imagine. The most astonishing truth is this: the house was built from curved wood, pieces that modern builders would likely discard at first glance. Yet to the people of the past, that very crookedness was the forest's gift. They walked deep into damp, shadowed paths, seeking trees whose trunks had bent with wind, with soil, with the long weight of years. A curved trunk meant it had been tested by nature. It was flexible, enduring, and carried strength in ways no craftsman could artificially create. When brought home, each trunk was split with meticulous care, then paired to form massive rafters rising like ribs that embraced the roof. Not a single metal nail was used. Every joint was wood on wood, mortises, tenons, wooden pegs, pressed so tightly that as the wood dried, it tightened further, as if the house were locking itself in place to withstand the winter storms. But the greatest surprise lay in the curves themselves. They allowed the entire frame to disperse the force of the wind, so that fierce gusts could not tear it apart, and heavy snow could not break it. A detail that at first glance anyone might mistake for a flaw, but in truth, it was the key to resilience. It reminds us that some things that seem misshapen are, in fact, the most perfect structures nature offers. What do you think of a home built from materials modern people might call substandard? Leave your thoughts below. Perhaps those small perspectives will reveal another layer of meaning that history is still whispering to us. The walls of a medieval house were not the crude barriers we often imagine. They were a living skin, made from clay, straw, plant fibers, and organic materials few people today would even consider. Once the wooden frame stood firm, villagers began weaving panels of willow and hazel, flexible yet strong, then coating them with a heavy, sticky mixture kneaded by hand like a dough meant to safeguard the winter. It was this blend that made all the difference. The straw held the structure together, the clay retained warmth, and the natural fibers inside kept the walls from cracking as they dried. At first glance, it seems like nothing more than a rustic wall, but the truth is far more refined. When winter arrived, that clay layer absorbed the day's warmth and released it slowly as night fell. It was never too hot, never too cold, holding the interior in a delicate balance, a priceless advantage during the biting season. Even more surprising, such walls could breathe. They let moisture escape gradually, preventing condensation, rot, and the heavy dampness one might expect. This was not the simplicity of scarcity, but the craftsmanship of people who understood their materials. They did not fight nature, they worked with it to keep warm. And thanks to those seemingly fragile walls, the entire house became a quiet cocoon, sheltering life through the long winter. The thatched roof of a medieval house was not merely a cover against sun and rain, but the thickest, strongest, and most refined garment people could craft from materials that seemed ordinary. Wooden frame rose like great ribs. The builders began layering the roof with long, even, tightly bound bundles of straw, often barley straw, wheat straw, or reeds from the lake's edge. They stacked them courses, each layer overlapping the one beneath it, angled just enough for rain to slide off before it could seep in. With every added layer, the roof grew thicker, sometimes nearly a meter deep, like a natural fur cloak embracing the entire house. What made a thatched roof extraordinary were the countless tiny air pockets between each strand of straw. These pockets trapped the day's warmth and kept the night's chill at bay, forming an insulating layer that even many modern materials struggle to match. But the greatest surprise came from the household fire itself. Smoke rising from the hearth threaded its way through the straw, leaving behind a thin, sooty coating. That layer helped the roof dry, strengthened it against moisture, deterred pests, and allowed it to endure for many years. A thatched roof did not merely shelter. It lived with the house, aged with it, and became the first shield against the long, unrelenting winter. In medieval homes, the true secret did not lie in the earthen walls or the thatched roof, but in something few ever notice: intentional tightness. People of the past understood that winter's enemy was not only the biting wind, but the tiny gaps through which warmth could silently slip away. So they built their homes as if crafting a box of warmth, where every entry point was calculated to retain as much heat as possible. Doors were always low, forcing anyone entering to bow, not for ceremony, but to slow and break the rush of cold air at the threshold. Inside, rough hides or thick cloths hung quietly, acting as curtains that kept the warm interior air from vanishing. Stranger still, many homes had almost no windows. If they did, they were no larger than a hand, covered with cloth, thin wood, or woven twigs. Light became dim, warmth became precious, and the house took on a half-real, half-dreamlike atmosphere, as if it held a secret known only to those who had survived many winters. Even the smoke hole in the roof was never fully open. It was adjusted to the weather, wide enough for smoke to rise, but never wide enough for heat to escape. All these details, gathered together, transformed the humble dwelling into a quiet but steadfast fortress of warmth. Many people today look into such a dim space and wonder how anyone endured it. But perhaps it was the darkness, the silence, and that fragile heat that gave the home its soul. What do you think of a dwelling built not for comfort, but to battle winter itself? Share your thoughts. Your perspective may illuminate something history has kept for its own. When winter entered its most unforgiving weeks, the wood stores in a medieval home began to thin. Dry logs were gone, small branches spent, and the fire at the center of the room dwindled to faint red embers, like a weakening breath. In that moment, a modern person might surrender to the darkness and let the cold seep into every corner of the house. But medieval people did not. They turned to something most of us today would dismiss as useless, even discard without a second thought: dried organic fuel cakes, mixtures of earth, plant fibers, and the natural matter found in barn and byre. What seems primitive to us was, for them, the most dependable lifeline of winter. Placed on the glowing coals, it did not flare up with bright, wasteful flame. It smoldered, slow, steady, releasing warmth for hours. Not dazzling, not extravagant, but as reliable as a heartbeat. This overlooked fuel was what allowed families to stretch the night's warmth without burning through the last of their resources. And this was a life-or-death decision. A large fire would bring quick heat, but it would vanish just as quickly. A low, constant ember could carry them safely into morning. The surprise is that the more scarce everything became, the more precious this fuel turned, like a kind of winter gold. It did not gleam, but it saved them. So ask yourself, between a blazing fire and a long-lasting warmth, which would you choose to survive a freezing night? Share your thoughts, because sometimes simplicity is the greatest secret of survival. When the cold began rising from the ground, seeping through layers of straw and into the spine, medieval people understood that the true danger was not the wind or the snow, but what lay directly beneath their feet. A frozen earth floor could draw warmth from the body slowly but relentlessly. And in that moment that seemed hopeless, they created a solution both primitive and astonishingly refined. An artificial floor made from clay, straw, and organic mixtures most modern people would never even consider. They kneaded, mixed, and stomped the blend until it became pliable and warm, like a second skin for the house. Then they spread it over the frigid ground, a layer as thick as a hand. Once dried, this floor did not radiate heat, but more importantly, it did not steal it from anyone resting above. A surprising reversal. What had been a thief of warmth became a foundation that helped hold it in place. On that surface, they added more layers: straw, animal hides, old cloth, each layer stacking atop the next like fragile yet effective rings of defense. No costly materials, no technology, only the understanding that sometimes survival does not require creating new heat at all. It only requires stopping the heat you have from slipping away. When night fell to its deepest point and only the faint red glow of embers remained, even human breath became the final line of defense. This was no longer about sleeping through the dark. It was a survival ritual, calculated like a strategy every medieval person understood by instinct. They did not sleep scattered. They formed a structure with order, with designated places, with a hierarchy of heat that, once seen, felt like witnessing an army preparing for battle. Children were placed at the center, the core. Around them lay the women, and on the outer ring the men, believed to endure cold more easily. Not patriarchy, not social roles, but a kind of tactical rule meant to optimize every degree of warmth. Even the animals were woven into this system. Cattle stood along the walls as thermal shields. Sheep lay in long rows like natural insulation mats, and pigs were placed near the most vulnerable because their bodies retained heat exceptionally well. This was no longer the scene of a family. It was the scene of a thermal alliance, a living ecosystem in which every body contributed to keeping the house from dropping to dangerous temperatures. The drama lay in this. If even one body stepped out of the ring, the entire structure could lose balance. The show-off was how they turned poverty into strategy. The political flex, medieval style, was how they organized warmth like a tiny society where every position carried responsibility. What about you? If you were placed in that circle, where would you stand? At the core or on the outer edge? Share your thoughts, for your perspective is what allows this story to breathe once more. There is one detail few people ever expect, and it is the key that unlocks the entire secret of medieval winter houses. The house never tried to become completely warm. It sounds like a paradox, yet that very choice is what allowed it to endure for centuries. From the moment the frame was raised, the walls packed, the roof laid, the doors positioned, medieval builders accepted a truth we modern people often refuse. A house that is too warm will quickly turn damp, rot, and be defeated by the cold pressing in from outside. Instead of fighting winter, they chose to coexist with it, keeping the house at a state of just warm enough, where heat did not escape, but also did not accumulate into destructive moisture. Because of this, every system in the house carried two faces. Smoke stung the eyes but dried the roof. The earthen floor was not warm, yet it did not drain heat. Small doors dimmed the light but preserved precious warmth. Tight sleeping circles felt cramped but prevented the heat from scattering. And here is the greatest twist of all. The medieval house was not a failure of architecture, but a triumph of adaptive thinking. It was not beautiful, not comfortable, yet every detail was so intelligently crafted it could stop a modern observer in their tracks. What the people of the past left us is not merely a building style, but a philosophy. Sometimes, to survive, we do not need to change the world. We need to understand how it moves and stand on its side. If this story stirred something in you, feel free to share it in the comments. And if you wish to continue exploring the survival secrets of the past, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next tales.